The Stonehurst Massacre of Oakland. We're back in Oakland, California with another true crime story. A reign of terror in the Stonehurst section of Oakland. Deep East Oakland, aka Stone City. Stonehurst is a neighborhood in East Oakland below International Boulevard between 98th Avenue and the city of San Leandro. South Stonehurst is directly below it on the other side of the train tracks / San Leandro Street. The Stonehursts were named after Lysander Stone, who came to the area in 1860. A farmer, he owned 250 acres, including a cherry orchard that also covered Elmhurst. Oakland, California. The murders of 6 people inside a dilapidated house, tucked into a pocket of poverty. In East Oakland has all the earmarks of a love story gone wrong, a tragic chapter that wiped out nearly an entire family. Violent death is not uncommon in Oakland, a city of 400,000 where 137 murders have occurred this year. But somehow this tragedy was different. It was not a slaying over drugs, nor the result of kids firing guns from cars in a drive-by shooting, or a burglary gone awry. The slaughter of a half-dozen people early Monday, December 8th, including 2 children asleep in their beds, rocked even the most hardened police investigators, who termed the motive senseless and trivial. It began when a gun-wielding couple kicked in the door of a peach-colored wood-frame house in the Stonehurst area at 5 a.m. and went on a rampage, firing 2 pistols and a semi-automatic 9mm rifle at 10 people sleeping inside. Killed in the carnage were Barbara Mabrey, 17, her brothers Darnell, 22, and Sean, 21, her daughter, Valencia Morgan, 3, and a mother and son staying with the Mabreys, Catherine Walker, 24, and Dwayne Fordelian's boyfriend, Leslie Morgan, 21, and her 3-month-old son, Dexter Welch, whose father is one of the suspected killers, were injured. Delane's mother, Barbara Mabrey, 37, and sister Stacy, 20, escaped. 9 hours after the shootings, Delane's spurned lover, ex-convict David Welch, 28, and his current girlfriend, Rita Lewis, 29, were arrested at a house about 2 miles away and charged with the murders. Welch's violent fits of temper had ended his tumultuous affair before Dexter's birth in September and began a series of vicious disputes between the families. It all started when my daughter got pregnant, and he wanted her to have an abortion, Barbara Mabrey said. I told him I didn't believe in that, so he jumped on her and beat her. I told him not to see her anymore. But Welch stayed around, alternately trying to make up with Delane and arguing with her mother and brothers until the final nightmare, when I woke up to gunfire, Barbara Mabrey recalled. I heard my children screaming and then the shooting. They just kept on shooting and shooting, she said, tearfully recounting the murders. I saw the woman, she said. She was in my daughter's bedroom, her and Welch, and he was shooting. I waited until they turned their backs, and I sneaked out of the back door and jumped over the fence to the neighbor's house. Mrs. Mabrey called the police, then watched as the suspects drove slowly away. I went back to the house and saw all my children dead, she said. The night before the massacre, witnesses said Welch came to the Mabrey home and got into a fistfight with Orlando Mabrey, another family member, apparently over one of 2 pit bull terriers he had entrusted to the family. Welch had purchased the dogs, a male and female he planned to breed, said Willie Walker, a longtime neighbor. The male dog disappeared, and Welch suspected Delane and Orlando had taken it. He came around for 4 or 5 days trying to find it, Walker said. Sharon Wright, who lives next door to the Mabreys, said Welch was going to offer a reward for the dog. I guess it was worth a lot to him, Wright said. He killed everybody in the house for it. The tragedy, investigators said, reflects the times in East Oakland, where poverty and drug dealing is rampant. This murder story is one of school dropouts, teenage pregnancies, and unchecked violence. I worked that district for 5 years, said Police Sergeant Michael Holland. It's a lower-income neighborhood where burglary and narcotics are rampant, but there are a lot of good people there, too. The 10-square-block Stonehurst area, in the shadow of overhead commuter train tracks, is a combination of crumbling wood-frame homes, machine shops, mom-and-pop grocery stores, car lots, and shut-down factories. It's a depressed area with very high unemployment, Holland said. Drug trafficking had become so bad that 6,000 residents marched on November 22nd in a mass anti-drug protest. But it's tough to combat the lure of drug money, said the Reverend J. Alfred Smith, Jr., assistant pastor of the nearby Allen Temple Baptist Church. Citing the estimated 16% unemployment rate in the Stonehurst area and a report from the city's Office of Community Development, Smith noted that almost 1 in every 5 Oakland residents has an insufficient income to maintain minimum living standards, and 61,600 live below the poverty threshold, $10,990 for a family of 4. But a teenage boy standing on the corner can earn $50 a day acting as lookout for drug dealers, he said. They are lured into a life of crime. The Mabreys, Morgan, and Welch grew up in this neighborhood. Who was this monster? What caused the volcanic eruption of terror in the Stonehurst community? This is such a tragic story in Oakland. How did this come to be? What's in the mind of David Esco Welch? Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll be bringing more unsolved, true crimes in Oakland as well as around the nation. David Esco Welch, born 1957/1958, is an American mass murderer who shot and killed 6 people during a home invasion of his girlfriend's house in Oakland, California on December 8, 1986. Welch was sentenced to death and remains on death row awaiting execution. A female accomplice, Rita Lewis, was given a sentence of 51 years to life imprisonment. The mass murder was considered the worst to occur in Oakland until it was surpassed by the 2012 Oikos University shooting. Early life of Welch. According to Wikipedia, Welch and his siblings grew up in a socially disadvantaged environment, as his father was a violent alcoholic who took his anger out on his children and his wife. It also found him guilty of 2 counts of attempted in connection with the same incident, and 1 count of concealing a firearm as a felon. It found true a multiple murder special circumstance allegation. At the penalty phase, it fixed his sentence at death. The trial court sentenced him accordingly. This appeal is automatic. A statement of facts say, the prosecution's case in the morning hours of December 8, 1986, defendant and his girlfriend at the time, Rita Lewis, broke down the front door of Barbara Mabrey's home in Oakland and killed 6 persons as they were sleeping in various rooms. Among the dead were Delaine Mabrey, the 16-year-old daughter of Barbara Mabrey and former lover of defendant, Sean and Darnell Mabrey, Barbara Mabrey's 21-year-old and 22-year-old sons, Catherine Walker and her 4-year-old son, Dwayne Miller, and Valencia Morgan, Delaine Mabrey, and Leslie Morgan's 2-year-old daughter. 4 people survived the attack. Barbara Mabrey escaped through the back door. Her son Stacy Mabrey avoided detection by hiding in a bedroom closet. Leslie Morgan, though shot in the arm, feigned death and later escaped through the back door. And Dexter Mabrey, a 9-month-old child, was only grazed by one of the bullets that killed his mother and sister. Delaine and Valencia had been shot in the head at close range. Sean had been shot in the chest and head while sleeping on the living room couch. His wounds were fatal, puncturing the aorta. Darnell Mabrey had also been fatally shot in the head while sleeping. Catherine Walker and Dwayne Miller had been shot while sleeping on the sofa in the den. They, too, had both been shot in the head at close range while asleep. Defendant and the Mabreys had serious difficulties with each other in the few months before the shooting. Barbara Mabrey had met defendant in early 1986. Her daughter, Delaine, was dating defendant and said that defendant was Dexter's father. Around September 1986, Barbara and defendant had an argument over Delaine, with Barbara telling him to stay away. On October 9, 1986, shortly after Dexter was born, defendant broke into the house and at gunpoint took Dexter away from Barbara. Delaine and her daughter Valencia went with defendant and were gone for 3 days. A few days later, when Barbara was going to the store, defendant drove up to her and spat at her from the car window, yelling, "Bitch, you are dead." He followed her home, striking her in the knee with his car as she tried to flee into her home and laughing as he did it. A day later, he told one of Barbara's friends to stay out of his business and to tell Barbara that she is a dead bitch. On October 20th, 1986, he confronted her again at a neighborhood market, throwing a liquid into her face. After cursing at her, he knocked her down and kicked her several times as she was on the ground. He escaped from the police on his motorcycle. On October 29, 1986, defendant entered the Mabrey house about 3 a.m. with a friend named Kenny and confronted Leslie Morgan in Dell Lane, slapping the latter in the face. He pointed the pistol at Barbara, telling her not to get near him, and saying that she'd better not go to court and testify against him or his people, or else they were going to take care of her, and that she would be killed slowly, shooting her arms off first and then her legs. He also ordered Leslie Morgan to leave, forcing him to flee in his underwear. He pointed a .45 caliber pistol towards the floor as he left Elaine's room. He told Darnell Mabrey, "Don't do anything," as he pointed the gun in Darnell's direction. He left the residence. Defendant was arrested for the October 29th incident and wrote Barbara a letter from jail requesting that she drop the charges. He was eventually released on bail. While at home with Dell Lane, Darnell, Sean, Stacy, Valencia, and Dexter, Barbara received a visit from defendant on December 6, 1986, who apologized to her, although Barbara did not accept the apology. He came over with his 2 pit bull puppies, which had been placed in the yard, and when he discovered one of them to be missing, angrily began accusing Darnell, Sean, and Steve Early, who was also at the house, of taking the puppy. Denying he had taken the dog, Early left in his car, with defendant close behind. As defendant left, he told those present they had better find his dog, or they would all be dead. Defendant then shot through Early's back window, all the while saying, "You stole my dogs, you motherfucker." He also said, as he was leaving, that they had better find his dog or they would all be dead. Early the next day, on December 7th, 1986, defendant and Rita Lewis went to the Mabrey house, asking Barbara not to testify against him in court, where she was scheduled to appear on December 9th. He also talked about Barbara's involvement in taking his dogs. Later that evening, Stacy's car was hit by a car driven by Vanessa Walker. A car with defendant, Dolores Walker, and 2 men, Billy the Kid and William Henderson, drove up to the scene. Defendant got out of the car with a pistol in his hand and pistol-whipped Stacy's friend Perry. He kicked Dolores out of the car, saying something about a dog. Barbara heard him say that, "You Stone City niggers," referring to the Stonehurst area of Oakland, "better get my dog or somebody's going to die." Later he told Dolores Walker that it's sick, going to be some bullshit tonight. In the early morning hours of December 8th, 1986, defendant returned to the Mabrey house. Stacy, Barbara, and Leslie Morgan all identified defendant as the shooter that morning. They all identified Lewis as his accomplice. 20 cal .4 th 724. According to this testimony, defendant was carrying an Uzi carbine in his hand and Lewis was holding a .38 caliber revolver. Stacy Mabrey went to his room and hid near the closet as defendant looked past him in the room and asked, "Where's Chuck?" Stacy's younger brother, who normally slept in the room. Stacy heard several more shots. Urged by Lewis to leave, defendant left the house, limping and holding on to Lewis and another person who helped him into a car. Barbara also woke up to gunshots and heard Dell Lane screaming, "No, Moochie, Finn too don't." She saw Lewis pointing a gun and telling defendant to get out of the way. Lewis had a pistol in her hands, and Barbara heard more gunfire before she escaped out of the house by the rear. Leslie Morgan testified that defendant stood at close range as he shot Dell Lane, saying, "This is for you, bitch." He also shot Valencia in the head. Leslie grabbed him and struggled with him, knocking his Uzi to the ground. Rita Lewis shot Leslie in the shoulder as they struggled. After defendant found his gun, he shot Leslie twice more in the arm, and Leslie played dead. Leslie did, however, see defendant straddle Delane's body and heard another gunshot. Defendant and Lewis went to Beverly Germani's residence at 2116 103D Avenue in Oakland shortly after the murders. About 5 a.m. defendant, who was a second cousin of Germani's, was lying on the porch and could not walk. He was in pain and only semi-conscious. Lewis told Germani that she had accidentally shot him. She was carrying a pillowcase. Germani asked Lewis whether it contained drugs, and she said it did not. She took the pillowcase outside and did not return with it. Germani eventually notified the police that defendant was at her house, and he and Lewis were apprehended. The murder weapons were found in a pillowcase in the backyard of Germani's house. There was an Uzi a Smith & Wesson .357 handgun, and a .38 caliber Taurus revolver. The Uzi had a 25-round capacity and was loaded with 1 round in the chamber and 4 rounds in the magazine. The .357 handgun was loaded and contained 3 live rounds and 3 spent rounds. The .38 caliber revolver was loaded with 2 live rounds and 4 expended cartridges. 1 slug recovered at the murder scene was fired from a Smith & Wesson .357. Other bullet fragments could have been fired by either a Smith & Wesson or a Taurus. Burned clothing was recovered from the fireplace. Blood found on tennis shoes recovered from 2116 103D Avenue matched Leslie Morgan's blood. 20 cal .4th 725. One of the tennis shoes could have made a shoe print found on Barbara Mabrey's front door. B. The defense was characterized by differing strategies by trial counsel and by defendant. Defendant was the first witness for the defense, taking the stand without a recess. And over defense counsel's protest that he wanted time to speak with him to find out what questions to ask, defendant testified generally that he did not commit the murders. He declined to answer questions about who had shot him and testified that he was shot in the leg between midnight and 5 a.m. in an incident at Scotty's liquor store, rather than at Barbara Mabrey's home. Defendant claimed that he had nothing to do with the shooting at the house the morning of December 8, 1986, and never threatened any of the Mabreys. He had gone to his cousin's house after being wounded because he believed there might be warrants for his arrest related to other matters. He also testified that he was a victim of mistaken identity and that it must have been some other Moochie who had committed the murders. The thrust of the defense presented by trial counsel, on the other hand, was that defendant's mental impairment from drug and alcohol intoxication at the time he committed the murders was such that he lacked the premeditation and deliberation necessary for a first-degree murder conviction. A urine screen and qualitative blood analysis had been performed on blood drawn from defendant on December 8, 1986. Defendant had alcohol in his blood and cocaine and morphine, a metabolite of heroin, in his urine. A quantitative analysis was never performed, so the exact amounts of alcohol, heroin, and cocaine defendant had consumed could not be estimated. Dr. Paul Herman explained the effects that these substances can generally have on the central nervous system. Alcohol and heroin, both depressants, and cocaine, a stimulant, whether consumed separately or in combination, can have a deleterious effect on motor skills and mental functioning, even at very low levels. Testimony to the same effect was provided by Dr. Fred Rosenthal, who also listed sleep deprivation as an additional factor affecting coherent thought processing. Trial counsel also presented a number of witnesses acquainted with defendant for the apparent purpose of demonstrating that he tended to act impulsively. C. Penalty Phase 1. Prosecution evidence in aggravation. The prosecution introduced evidence that defendant had been convicted of 3 prior felonies. Assault with a deadly weapon, in violation of Section 20 cal .4th 726, 245, subdivision A, on May 8, 1981. Receiving stolen property, in violation of Section 473. On August 5, 1981, an assault on a police officer in violation of Section 243, subdivision C, on April 7, 1983. Evidence of a number of instances of uncharged violent conduct was also introduced. While in juvenile hall in October 1973, defendant hit a counselor and spit on him as he was trying to run away from the facility. He had just been brought down for disciplinary problems from one of the camps to a more secure facility. Defendant, when he was a juvenile, discharged a shotgun into Faye McPherson's residence on December 26, 1975. The McPhersons had been his neighbors for 11 years and had not previously had any problems with him. The blast damaged the walls above her child's crib. On March 20, 1979, defendant was involved in a high-speed chase with several San Francisco police officers. When the police finally stopped his motorcycle, he got off and a struggle ensued, with defendant punching and kicking the officers. He hit one of the officers with clenched fists and kicked him as well. He also tried to run over another officer with his motorcycle, getting within 3 to 5 feet before the officer jumped out of the way. On December 20, 1979, defendant assaulted Oakland police officer Rosemary Dixon while she was working at the warrant division at the station house. She suffered serious injuries as a result of the assault. Defendant raped and sodomized John L.T., a former lover, on May 21, 1980. On January 22, 1985, while in maximum security custody, defendant got into a fight with another inmate. He did not stop fighting when ordered and eventually had to be subdued with mace. On July 12, 1985, he fought with another inmate while they were being transported to jail from court. On December 16, 1987, while in custody for this case, defendant refused to go to court and started swinging at one of the correctional officers. He gave Deputy Charles Utvik a glancing blow to the side of the head. He made a statement to Deputy Mark Johnson that he was going to kill him or have him killed, and that he would have the rest of the deputies taken care of as well. Several instances of violent behavior while defendant was incarcerated at state prison were introduced. On December 9, 1981, while in a visiting room, he grabbed his wife, Terry West, by the neck and threw her against the wall. On February 19, 1982, defendant struck a correctional officer in the jaw. On June 24, 1982, he spit on correctional captain Stephen D. Lawrence several times after Lawrence meted out a 30-day loss of privilege following a disciplinary hearing. Shortly thereafter, when he got back to his cell from the disciplinary hearing, he threw some fecal matter at correctional officer Roy Wade Gowan, hitting Gowan in the face. He then started hitting Gowan and another officer, swinging the handcuffs during the struggle. Gowan was struck twice by the handcuffs during the struggle and required medical treatment for the cuts on his forehead and eyebrow. Defendant also bit him. On September 25, 1982, while in jail, defendant struck a deputy sheriff in the face with a closed fist. After the deputy sprayed defendant in the face with mace, the defendant hit the deputy again in the face with his fists. The deputy suffered lacerations of his chin and left eye and several cracked ribs, and lost time from work for about 2 weeks. Thank you for your time. Hope we all learned something here on the mental state of a man consumed with drugs, alcohol, and severe violence against those who loved or had love for this person. In this sad story, no one wins. Young lives were lost. Please be grateful for your loved ones, your family, and your friends. Life is too short to take for granted. Like, comment, and subscribe for more content to come.